On Tech News Today, European privacy regulators want Google to censor globally and keep that censorship a secret. Plus, Facebook is finally making big bucks in mobile advertising, and the more we learn about diversity in Silicon Valley, diverse it gets. Stick around, Tech News Today is next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Thursday, July 24th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your used gadgets. Find out what your used Apple and Android devices are worth at Gazelle.com. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mike Elgan, and with me, of course, is Jason Howell at the controls.
Hello.
There he is. That's Jason. And we also have a guest co-anchor, Christina Warren, Senior Tech Analyst for Mashable. Welcome, Christina Warren.
Happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here. Now, before we get into the news proper, you did a post about Foursquare removing check-ins, and you said they're trying to become Yelp. Do you agree with my perspective, at least, that companies like Foursquare, they really harm themselves when they take sort of iconic features, I guess, for lack of a better term, and they get rid of them in their attempt to be like other companies? Is that your view as well?
Yeah, it is. I think especially when you've become so ingrained with a certain concept like Foursquare was with the check-in, I feel like if you want to pivot, which, you know, honestly, I think from a business perspective is probably what Foursquare needs to do if they're going to survive. But if you want to pivot, they probably should have started doing it 2 years ago and not doing it now when all the money is running out and they're kind of, you know, grasping at straws, because you lose all that goodwill that your brand has built up over the years with your core users, and everybody else is just like, well, why would I use this and not just use Yelp? So
sure, exactly. And you know, their most hardcore and loyal users have built up this muscle memory around checking in. It's what they like about it. That's what they've always done with it. And to just sort of rip the rug out from under those users in an attempt to get users who are less loyal and less, you know, excited about the service seems like a bad idea. But.
No, it really does. And I think for me, what would make the service still useful in some ways is if they would at least make Swarm completely like kind of what the old Foursquare experiences was like. You know, if they want to make the core Foursquare app not about checking in, that's great. But at least have Swarm make it visible to see places nearby and let me rate and like places in Swarm. And those ratings can go back to Foursquare proper. But it just feels like separating the two apps the way they've done it doesn't really serve anyone. And it just only goes to further, I guess, what their business mission is. And again, I mean, that might be valid. They might need to pivot really, really desperately. But when you pivot at this late of a stage, yeah, you're going to really anger your core users and not necessarily give a whole lot of incentive for new people to come on board.
Yeah, and Foursquare, if you're listening, just add the feature back in as an option. You can go default without it, but just have it in there so people can check in if they want to. It's not that hard, I assume. What do I know? I'm just a journalist. Let's jump into the news. European regulators have summoned Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo to talk about how these companies have implemented the EU's right to be forgotten ruling. Regulators will insist that search engines censor search results not only in Europe, but globally, according to some media reports. They also may pressure Google to stop notifying websites that have been affected by the censorship, according to these reports. Aoife White is a Brussels-based reporter for Bloomberg and joins us now to talk about this issue. Welcome, Aoife.
Hello.
So glad you're here. Now, you wrote that one data protection commissioner said the right to be forgotten ruling had backfired. What did he mean by that?
This is a work in progress. There's a work in progress for regulators, very much so for Google. And they have, I mean, a court ruled 2 months ago now, in case you've forgotten, about giving not very clear advice on what, and ordering Google to be in the first row of what they should do here, and that they should take requests directly from people who want to be forgotten. And Google had to come up with its own set of rules, which it did, and it's starting to make those requests and disappear people from certain links and a search only on a person's name, not very widely. And people who aren't happy with how Google is dealing with this can go to their local data protection regulator, and there's 28 of them. There's one in every EU member state. And some of them have different ideas about what should be private and what shouldn't be. And they need to get together and figure out what the rule should be for the whole of Europe. And they invited in Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft to talk about this and to hear from them today. But they still haven't come up with any decision of what those guidelines should be and how they should jointly deal with problems that they see with Google. So we're going to see that process rumble on. I mean, certainly they'll meet again later this year in September, and they'll try and bash out those guidelines. But I mean, in the meantime, Google is making those requests and dealing with the requests that it gets from people, and it's had an awful lot. Other search engines are rolling out their solutions. Microsoft already has, Yahoo hasn't yet. And we're still waiting to know whether there is any room for maneuver. What's the wiggle room here?
Now, of course, we hear a lot of chatter in the United States about this as a hugely controversial thing, and it's an interesting issue because, in general, the public that's paying attention to this, at least, tends to be generally opposed to the EU's ruling around the right to be forgotten. And as I understand it, within Europe, the people who are paying attention are generally in favor of it. So that's an interesting cross-Atlantic dynamic there. But is there chatter in the European Union among either the people involved in this or among the public or the press that that they risk creating a precedent that would invite other governments like in China or Iran to sort of censor or change search engines globally? For example, I'm sure that the government of Pakistan would like to erase all kinds of things or get rid of all kinds of queries that are possible with Google search globally, right? Is there any concern within Europe that that could happen?
You do hear that rhetoric. I mean, I've seen it mostly in the UK press, where there's perhaps more interest in media freedom. I mean, I don't think I see this described as censorship, and that's a little unfair. I mean, there are strong rights to privacy.
Can I stop you there? I searched a dozen dictionaries today, and I couldn't find a single entry that would make this not be censorship. I mean, the definition of the word censorship is what they're doing here. They're removing information for the public good, ostensibly, and it's censorship. I don't understand. I've heard people say that it's not censorship, but as far as I can tell, that's what the word means.
Well, we live under the law, and the law says that certain things should not be published. I mean, whether it's a juvenile conviction, for example, Holocaust denial in Germany is something that you can't publish. You can't publish the names of people involved in a court case in Germany. So there are lots of rules throughout Europe about what you can publish and what you can't in certain circumstances. And, you know, as a journalist, I work in Belgium, so that we have to obey some of the rules in Belgium. But those are, where this becomes more complicated is that each of those regulators has an opinion. And you were asking about what I wrote about. That was the opinions of some of the regulators. And they need to come together with what they think should be the case for across Europe. And there are probably some who feel that Google should publish more, shouldn't have to take down as many links as they do. And there are some people who feel they should do more. And there was the two issues that were raised were notifications, where Google tells a website that it's going to remove a link, and where it applies the ruling to local Google sites, so google.co.uk, the UK site, for example. And it doesn't do it on google.com, even though I can search right away. I could search on any name I like, and I would get the information. I mean, so I still have that access to that information, right or wrong.
Now, is there any conversation in Europe about why only U.S.-based search engines are being forced to comply with this ruling? There are lots of smaller search engines in Europe and other search engines around the world. Why are they singling out only America-based search engines?
Well, the ruling says any search engine. Google is by far the most used search engine in Europe. And we see that we have an antitrust case going on about that issue, which is another thing entirely. But Bing, Opera, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo have very, very small market shares in Europe, and not very big elsewhere either. So and Google took this case. Google challenged a decision by a privacy regulator, and that went to an EU court. So I suppose this has become the Google ruling and directed at Google because they did fight the case, and they provide most of the searches in Europe. But no, I mean, the law is fairly clear. It applies to all search engines.
Christina Warren, I'd like you to weigh in on this. I mean, here we have a situation where, you know, let's face it, Google is being kind of passive-aggressive about their compliance with this ruling. They're putting this notification at the bottom of all search results that involve a name that these results could be modified. It sounds like they're going the extra mile to sort of let everybody know that this this is happening, this ruling exists. They're notifying various publications like the BBC and the Guardian newspaper, which then made changes in response. What do you think they're likely to do if these reports are correct? I mean, you've been following the technology scene in the U.S. What is Google, for example, going to do if European regulators say, look, you can't tell anybody about this, and you have to change these results globally? Do you think they're going to, is there any scenario under which you can imagine them complying with this?
No, to be completely honest. And I don't think that there should be. I mean, you know, while it's true that there might be certain publishing restrictions and things that you can and can't, you know, publish in Europe and in various countries, you know, Google.com, they have various search engines for other countries. Google is an index. You know, they're not actually publishing the content, and I'm not aware of any case law that holds Google itself liable for the content of those publishers. So, to me, I don't see that there would be any reason that they would want to go out of their way to either diminish letting people know what's happening, because that's, as you said, they're being very passive aggressive about it. They want people to know, hey, you're not seeing something you should be seeing, or to, you know, increase the amount of scrubbing that they're doing to affect all search engines, or all, you know, localized search engines. I don't see that happening. You know, I think that and Google in China, for instance, operates very differently than Google does here, but I can't see any EU ruling taking effect for primary Google.com, especially for, you know, US-based servers. I think that just opens up, you know, a huge regulatory can of worms that, frankly, I think that the EU, if they really wanted to try to fight that, they're probably not going to win.
Now, Aoife White, now this is obviously a really interesting situation in and of itself, but it also appears to be a trend. There was a judge in Canada that required Google, only Google, no other search engine, to remove information about a specific company, not only presently, but all future websites that emerge with references to this company, and they required Google to do this globally. So it seems to be something of a trend where democratic governments are sort of having this this precedent where a government in a single country can censor or make changes to a search engine globally, and it sounds to me like a pretty toxic precedent. That's my opinion. That is not your opinion. That's my opinion. Now, separately, yesterday we have another show here called This Week in Google, and on that show, a professor of journalism who's a regular on the show, he's a host of the show, named Jeff Jarvis, talked about the uneven enforcement of the ruling between search engines. For example, it's up to Google and Yahoo and Microsoft to make the decision internally about whether a claim or a request is valid or not, and then to proceed accordingly. Are European regulators concerned about the inevitable differences between search engines in the enforcement of this requirement?
I haven't heard that specifically, but yeah, I mean, they have, this is a problem. I mean, Google might have one set of rules, Yahoo might have another, and regulators can't do anything until people complain back to the regulator. And then if they're not happy with the regulator, they can go to a court. So, you know, the process is very messy. I mean, the EU court ruling that came out in May couldn't be appealed. So Google just had to figure it out and do it so very quickly, or they chose to do so very quickly anyway. And regulators are moving very, very slowly to figure out what they should do. I mean, it's, you know, I agree with you. This is not an ideal situation. It's not an even situation. It's a situation where a court moved much faster than legislators and companies, and everybody just had to figure out what to do. It's messy, to say the least.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and adding to the messiness, I mean, you know, so just to clarify, because there's a lot of there are a lot of myths and misconceptions that have arisen around this. Just to clarify what this is all about, the right to be forgotten is about what results are returned when a specific person's name is used as a search query. This is not about any sort of article that includes that person's name being completely wiped out of the search engine indexes. It's about that name. So, for example, if I'm accused of robbing a bank, for example, and then I go to court, and then I'm found not guilty of the crime, then I can submit a request to Google. Google might decide that that's legitimate, and if they do decide that's legitimate, if you search for my name, you won't get the articles that talked about the court case or the accusation or any of that stuff. That's my understanding of it. And I think that's pretty much how it works. Now, the problem with that, of course, is well, there are multiple problems with it, but one of them is that certain types of people, politicians, rich people, famous people, you know, the elites are essentially going to use this kind of ruling much more so than everybody else. The other problem with that ruling is that it basically, you know, the fact that I was accused of this crime, the fact that there was a court case around this crime, those are facts that happened. Publications reported those facts, and now the search engine has been made inaccurate. The search engine is increasingly will stop reflecting the realities of the web. So why don't they in Europe, in the right to be for privacy, why don't they go after the publications that report these obsolete facts or these inaccurate facts? Why not just go directly to the Guardian and say you have to either cross out the name or you have to erase the article or something like that? Why not just do that?
We asked the Spanish data protection regulator who ruled in that case that went to the EU court, this Spaniard who had bad debts. He had it was a notice of auction of his house in a newspaper article, and he wanted both the newspaper notice removed and he wanted the link on Google removed. And he was told that he couldn't get the newspaper, the original newspaper piece taken down. That was going to remain in the archive, but he could get the link taken down. And this is where it all started and rolled on, as we know. And the Spanish Data Protection Commission thinks that that's where the harm is, that the problem is that people will casually Google you or search you, and that's where somebody who wouldn't necessarily know about your past comes upon it in 2 seconds. But I guess from, you know, logically, you could still go out and find that information. You can hire a private detective to find that information, but they saw the harm in that initial search on the name. But this doesn't apply if you add another search term. So if I look for Mike Elgan bank robber, I'll still find that article. If I have an idea of what I'm looking for, I'll still find it. I've done this on this Spaniard guy. I mean, you can still, if you search his name alone, Mario Costeja, you can find the original article is gone. But if you search for that plus the name of the newspaper, you'll find it in milliseconds. So I mean, going back to, does this really answer the right to be forgotten? I mean, there are people who are going to want that information off entirely, and that's another debate. I mean, what we're looking at right now is the search engine and their responsibility. Going back to the initial publication, and I suppose it depends what it is. I mean, a legal report on a court case or a court conviction is very different from something that might be libelous or untrue. But this is where we haven't really had those shades of meaning yet, and Google hasn't even published the kind of takedowns it's doing, so we don't really know what decisions it's making and why. Yeah. And this is where this is not over. This is going to take months, much longer, maybe even years, to figure out what is the right to be forgotten, how far does it go, and is it European or is it universal?
Basically what this is it makes it less convenient and a little slower to find out information, because people can just go to the newspaper sites and search those, and there will inevitably be alternative websites that can't be controlled by governments that will offer this. Anyway, Aoife White writes for Bloomberg.com, and you can find her on Twitter and follow her on Twitter. And I'm going to spell this because we were talking about this earlier, outside of Ireland, the name Aoife is not spelled like you think it might be. So that's AOIFE. WHITE 101. Thank you so much for joining us on Tech News Today. All right, in just a sec, we can talk about Facebook's amazing earnings report yesterday, but first I want to tell you about Gazelle. Gazelle will buy your used gadget, and the reason you'll want to do that is because they'll give you good money for a device you're not using. They'll put it back into service, which is really, really great. People tend to feel guilty about frequently upgrading their technology, getting a new phone every year instead of 2 years. Maybe I should wait 2 years. Maybe I should wait 3 or 4 years. Maybe that'd be good for the environment. No, it is not good for the environment. What's good for the environment is for you to upgrade early and often, and then that device that you're not getting a lot of value out will go into the hands of somebody who will make good use of it. And the sooner you do that, the more valuable it is to you, the more valuable it is to the person who ends up with that device eventually. So you need to use Gazelle to get your used gadget back into circulation. And that's GAZELLE.com. Just go to gazelle.com, find your item, tell the condition, and they'll give you a price. That price is locked in for 30 days, and then you can send it in. It's super easy. They send you a box with a sticker. You throw the phone in the box, you throw the sticker on the outside of the box, and off it goes, and then you get paid fast. You get paid fast by check, by PayPal, through PayPal, or you can get an extra 5% if you use the Amazon gift card option, that's the one I use. I really like that one a lot. Again, super easy to use, and you'll get really good money for a device that you no longer love, and it'll get into the hands of someone who will love it. It'll find a good home. So find out what your Apple or Android device is worth. Take a minute, go to Gazelle.com and find out. Do it now because your device may lose value the longer you wait. Well, Facebook's stock price is soaring today after yesterday's earnings report. Reed Albergotti is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and joins us now to tell us all about it. Welcome, Reed.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Now, Facebook reported surprisingly strong growth in advertising revenue, especially mobile ad revenue. How did they do this? I mean, mobile ad revenue has been a tough nut to crack for a long time, especially for Facebook, but it sounds like they've really mastered it. So what did they do right?
Well, I mean, the one thing I'd like to say first is I don't think it was that surprising. I mean, they did beat Wall Street analysts' expectations, but they've done that for 9 quarters in a row. So, I think we all expected Facebook to have a really good quarter. They were up by over 60% in their revenue, most of that coming from advertising. Actually, the majority of their revenue now coming from mobile advertising. And I think that's really continues to be the big story with Facebook is their ability to just nail it on mobile. It's really this kind of new frontier, and I think they're the only player who can challenge Google, which is still the dominant market leader in digital advertising and mobile advertising. So it was pretty interesting to just see how they continue to ramp this up.
Christina Warren, Zuckerberg said that he wants Facebook to become a search engine, essentially. Do you see people using Facebook instead of Google to find random things, movies or whatever, on the internet?
I'm already seeing that happen, observing my non-technical friends and even some of my colleagues. People spend so much time on Facebook. And, I think they announced during the earnings yesterday that the average American spends 40 minutes a day on Facebook, which is just... I mean, it's insanity. And so they've got basically, the browser window open, and very frequently they type things into Facebook before they type it into anything else. And I think Zuckerberg's vision is always been to kind of be the platform for the web is what he's always kind of said. I think his idea is kind of like Microsoft, wanted Windows to be ubiquitous. He wants Facebook to be like the operating system for the internet. And whether that's good or bad, I mean, we can debate. But I think that, the fact that so many people are using it and primarily using it on mobile devices within increasing usage and especially in these really surging markets, I think that it does inevitably become the go-to place for people to search. And that's one of the reasons why advertisers have flocked to Facebook so much, is because mobile search is very different than desktop search. And if you're already spending so much time in a mobile app like Facebook and interacting with friends and messages and photos and other things, it becomes much easier to type something in and potentially see an ad or go directly to a page where you might have an offer or have some other sort of interaction than it would be to, open up a different app or different, if you're in a browser, a different tab. And go from there. So it becomes a lot more contextual, potentially on mobile than it ever could be on the desktop even.
Now, Zuckerberg said that 1 minute out of every 5 spent on mobile devices in the United States is spent on Facebook, which, if true, is really incredible for them to have achieved that. Now, Reed Albergotti, Zuckerberg said that over time there will be some overlap between Messenger and payments. What is Facebook planning there?
Well, look, I mean, they hired a guy from eBay who's a payments expert, a messaging and payments expert. And I think it's really clear. It may be a more of a developing world kind of strategy in these countries, which is really where Facebook's seeing its user growth in, places like India and, Asian countries. People use cell phones, and we're not talking about iPhones here. We're talking about feature phones or really just old school flip phones to send little micro payments to each other. And Facebook getting into that area could be kind of interesting overseas. And, they've also added a buy now button to Facebook. And it's not really, I mean, they're not putting a dent in Amazon by any means. They're not even fulfilling the purchases through Facebook, but they're allowing retailers to kind of use Facebook as a mechanism to get people to, buy products. And that's just a test. So, they're pulling in credit card information And I think they want to start to integrate all of that across the platform. And that's where, this messenger app that they've been really pushing so hard to try to get people to use it. It's really their only successful separate mobile app is going to be kind of central to that.
Well, you can read Albergotti at WSJ.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Reed Albergotti. Thank you so much for joining us on Tech News Today, Reed.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, Twitter released information about employee gender and ethnicity. And as with other major Silicon Valley companies, Twitter is conspicuously white and male, just as everyone expected. Kat Zakrewski writes for TechCrunch and joins us now to talk about Twitter's diversity report. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on the show today.
I'm glad you're here. Now, can you give us some details on Twitter's diversity report? What did they find out?
Sure. So the numbers were actually very similar to some of the numbers we saw from Facebook and Google in the past 2 months. So Twitter's report found that overall in employees, 70% were male and 30% were female. But when you look specifically at those numbers for jobs in tech, we saw a big shift where 90% of employees were male and only 10% were female. Looking at diversity, also a big gap. We saw 60% of employees were white and close to 30% were Asian, and so very small numbers for both Hispanic and African American workers, both around 2 to 3%.
Now, overall, the company percentage of white employees at 60% is probably the least problematic number in the whole thing. The U.S. population is about 63% white, but within the tech sphere, as you mentioned, it's 90%. And so I'm sorry, I got that wrong. 90% of the tech employees at Twitter are male. So that's one of the problems. So you have these different, of course, they have lots of different job functions, but within the technology thing, it's overwhelmingly male, 90%, and overwhelmingly white and or Asian. The most underrepresented groups are African Americans, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Hispanics, which together combined make, I've heard two numbers on this. One is less than 9% and one is less than 7% of the company's U.S. employees overall. Either one of those is very, very low. So Christina Warren, what's the solution to this? I mean, obviously, the Silicon Valley companies say, hey, we're just trying our best to hire the best candidates, and it's difficult to find people who are qualified. First of all, do you buy that argument? And secondly, what is the solution?
First of all, no, the meritocracy argument is bunk. I mean, if you really care about having a diverse company, and if that's really something that's core to your culture, you can find diverse people to hire. And there are a lot of companies that do. And I'm not sure if Kat can comment on this. I don't have the figures in front of me, but I think that at least when it comes to the tech space, Twitter's figures for male to female representation are even worse than they are at Facebook and Google and some of the other companies. Do you know offhand, Kat, if that's the case?
I actually don't have those numbers in front of me right now, but I think that's definitely possible looking at the numbers that came out yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, a 90% of male employees who are in tech versus 10%, that's worse even, I think, than some graduation, the most average graduation rates. And that's worse than the industry as a whole. So I think that to say that, this is because of a meritocracy thing, it is not true. And if you cared about diversity, then you would go out of your way to try to have a more diverse company. I think the solution is a lot more complex. And we could get into a much longer conversation, and maybe at some time we should, about how to encourage women in tech. But I think the biggest thing, honestly, is that, it has to be part of a company's value system. And with Twitter being a company that has grown so quickly and, gone from being a startup to a public company, much as some others have, but its trajectory, especially with its hiring, has been particularly stark. I think that sometimes, especially with the engineering jobs, people get into a bubble where they start hiring, a specific type of person. And that person invariably turns out to be either white or, as we've seen in this report, Asian and male. And when you start to look for that sort of person, and that is the idea of the only type of candidate you can have, that tends to place anyone who doesn't fit that mold out, regardless of their qualifications and regardless of how well they might fit with the team. You start to use buzzwords, like, well, fit, or how is this culturally, will they, work with us, as opposed to, looking around and saying, are we in a bubble right now, and do we have too many people that are the same? And frankly, I mean, that can end up being a product problem too, because if all of your developers are generally the same type of person, and if it's not representative of your users, that can, for a company like Twitter that's already struggling to continue to gain engagement and to build engagement over time, that's possibly representative one of the reasons that the core people working on the product aren't necessarily representative of the users.
Now, Kat, one of the things that you find in academia, for example, is you have a studies have shown that you have an overwhelming number of professors, for example, who are politically on the left as opposed to on the right. And what studies have found is that people tend to hire other people who are kind of like themselves, just like Christina Warren was saying. And now among leaders within Twitter, they found, and I thought this was an interesting metric, they found that among leaders, only 21% of managers, I guess is what they're talking about, managers, executives, and so on, are women. So that potentially, when you talk about hiring, that could be one leverage point that Twitter has. Do you agree with that point? And what other advice might you give as a woman in technology yourself, who writes about technology? What advice would you give to Twitter about turning some of this around?
Sure. So I think one of the things I wrote in my article was this isn't a problem that's going away anytime soon. We're seeing it at Twitter. We're seeing it at a lot of companies here in Silicon Valley. So it's clearly not just Twitter's problem. It's something with the overall culture here, I think, with tech. But I think that's definitely a great point to make about the executive level workers and the gender gap that exists there. But I think we see that at a lot of companies in a lot of different industries where you have a big gender gap in management, but maybe not as stark of a gender gap when it comes to overall employment. So I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is a result of just an overall society issue that we have here in the United States, where girls aren't as encouraged to study computer science and coding. So Twitter and Google and a lot of these companies are really starting to get into different initiatives to encourage that. The biggest one that people are familiar with is Girls Who Code. But I think that it's something that you really have to start recruiting at the high school and college level for these companies from these groups. Because just an example was I was at an intern networking event the other night that I covered, and there were 2,000 interns who signed up for the event, and only about a third of those interns were female. So this is a problem that's starting kind of at the college and high school level. So I think working to encourage girls to pursue careers in this field is very important to fixing the problem.
Yeah, and also just one last parting shot in all of this about the cultural aspect of this. One of the ways that I've seen some really ham-handed attempts to get girls in high school and younger interested in technology, and one of the ways they do that is they say, oh, if you write code, you can make a shopping app and stuff like that. Instead of getting girls interested in the intrinsic benefits of coding and engineering or whatever the issue is, they try to sort of change the subject or something, and it seems to me that that's the wrong way to do it. So, Kat Zakrewski, thank you so much. You're at TechCrunch.com, and if you'd like to follow Kat, you can find her at Kat_Zakrewski on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks
on Tech
so much
News
for
today.
having me.
All right. Well, Amira Fradi, writing for the tech news site The Information, reported yesterday that Apple has been speaking with payments industry companies, and his sources say that Apple's discussing launching a mobile wallet product in the fall, which is about when the iPhone 6 is also expected to ship. According to the report, Apple told these potential partners that its secure enclave concept, previously associated with fingerprint data, would store sensitive personal financial information on the phone itself, and this wouldn't be accessible to carriers or anyone else. Christina Warren, I've said this probably 10 times on this show. I think it's super inevitable that Apple is just going to dominate commerce when they come out with a mobile wallet someday, and it looks like that someday may be coming up pretty soon.
I'm in 100% agreement. We talked for years about NFC and kind of the rise of mobile payments that way. And in the United States, it hasn't taken off in large part because the retailers don't want to pay to upgrade their terminals, their point of sale systems. What Apple has real potential with is two things. One, if as the information report was saying, that they are going to be keeping the secure data on the phone and it won't be transmitted to carriers or anyone else, then that gets rid of the whole, secure element controversy that Google ran into with Google Wallet. Google wanted to control it, carriers wanted to control it. In this case, if it's on the phone and not actually on the cloud anywhere, then that gets rid of a lot of that controversy. And then the second part, of course, is that because Apple's using, iBeacon for a lot of things, it would make sense that iBeacon would be a big part of the payment method. And what's great about iBeacon is that it could be augmented onto existing terminal systems without requiring a complete overhaul because it uses Bluetooth as opposed to having to be, the closeness of near field within a few millimeters. So I think that there's a lot of potential there. But I do believe that once Apple rolls out a payment system, because of the ubiquity of the iPhone, especially amongst the highest earners in the market, that's to me is one of the reasons why it'll take off, is because that's what will finally convince retailers to start supporting these sorts of mobile payments, is the fact that they know that iPhone users tend to have money and tend to buy things and tend to be more on the early adoption swing, at least in terms of buying phones that have those capabilities, than the market as a whole. And so they'll say, okay, well, if the iPhone has it, then we'll go ahead and support it. Not to mention the fact that, Apple comes into this with like 800 million credit cards already connected to iTunes. So, I mean, I'm with you. I think it's almost inevitable, right? Like they're going to totally dominate mobile payments, provided they really want to take a stab at it. That really becomes the only question, is how much do they want to be in this market, and is that going to take away from any of their core focuses in other areas?
Well, I had several points to make, and you made them all for me, and I appreciate that, because I'm pretty lazy, and you just keep talking and make all my points for me. But I think you're exactly right, and I'm really predicting that a huge, just like right now, the iPhone makes up a vast majority of Apple's revenues, well over 50%, as we learned this week. In the future, I think it's going to be payments and commerce and things like that that are going to make up the majority of Apple's revenue. I don't think any phone handset maker is going to be able to make massive profits on hardware indefinitely. So I think that this is they've been trying to do it right. They have, and just to recap all the benefits that they have super secure fingerprint ID. They have a user base that are the types of people who buy lots of expensive things, and so that's a huge benefit. They have iBeacon, the micro-location feature. They have 800 million credit cards, and they're Apple, and they're probably the world's leading brand. So they can go to these companies, these big retailers, and say, look, we're Apple, we have the system, and that's the big thing, is to get the infrastructure, because all these stores have different incompatible infrastructures for payments. But if there's a company like Apple, and I think Apple's the only company that could really pry that open, I think it's just a no-brainer that they're just going to dominate this space. Well, Reddit launched its live thread feature, which was developed to crowdsource news gathering and news fact-checking in real time. Updated posts appear without the need to refresh the page. The feature had been in semi-open beta for months, and during that time, only Reddit staff could create live events. Now anyone can do so by going to reddit.com/live. And the feature is probably a response to the witch hunt that occurred on Reddit. As police were looking for suspects in the Boston Marathon bombings last year, Reddit was engulfed in runaway speculation that an innocent student who had gone missing was the bomber. His name was Sunil Tripathi. Christina Warren, this is I think it's a pretty cool thing for at least one reason, and that is I love streams that update by themselves without you having to touch anything. I just love that.
I do too. I do too. In fact, before this feature was rolled out, but I always use Reddit with a browser extension called Res, which automatically updates certain things, refreshes it at certain intervals. But no, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. This is almost definitely in response to the terrible witch hunt that occurred during the Boston Marathon, the search for those bombers. And when I was on Reliable Sources at the end of the year, that was actually that was my pick as the worst moment in media of the year was that, witch hunt. And I think that it's beneficial because what's happening and what I'm sure you've seen, what I found with breaking news events, and we've seen this with, the most recent Malaysian Airlines crash and some of the other events happening, even things tragedies but even things like the World Cup, is that people are invariably going to Reddit and using that as kind of a collection place to discuss and share information as stuff happens. And to be able to do it in real time, I think is great and has potential Of course, it has potential to be abused, but I think it has the potential to really allow people to kind of get a much better view of what's happening from various sources. And anytime I can not have to, hit Control R, or Command R, I'm much happier.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not really clear on exactly how this is going to prevent another witch hunt, though. I appreciate the fact that they're trying to avoid that. I assume it's because you can't really vote up or down the comments. You can, the new information comes in and it's just a linear thing. So you can't get this mob mentality going where everybody's agreeing with what they see on top because it's on top. It's really chronological order, so I guess that will help. But I'm not sure that there's really any way to crowdsource things without the risk of some kind of mistaken information becoming the sort of the de facto truth, if you will, even if it's not true. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're dead on. I mean, I think that it's not going to solve the problem. I think what I'm thinking is, A, the linear nature, as you mentioned, not having something pinned at the top. But I also think that so much of what happened around the witch hunt stuff is that somebody will post something, it gets a lot of votes, and then the conversation completely stems from that piece of information. Whereas if it's happening in a linear function, in an always moving linear function, the implication seems to be, at least to me as a user, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't use it the way other people do, that this is an ongoing situation and that what's happening here is just a snippet in time, and it's not as if it's fact. Whereas if you see, a standalone kind of post or thread, and the conversation is happening there, you almost feel like, okay, well, this is already factually guaranteed to have happened. Versus, kind of like a news crawl at the bottom of a screen, you kind of, or stock ticker, you kind of understand this is happening in real time. Versus, the headlines that show up in the newspaper every day, where you say, okay, well, this is what's already been reported and vetted. I don't know, though.
It's a great point and that you're making there, and I hope you're right. I hope that does kind of solve the problem, and I'm looking forward to using it myself, and I would call on anybody out there who's got any sort of social anything to please give us a hands-free stream. I felt like crying when Google Plus got rid of their hands-free stream. I used to have it on the side, and it was just going all day, and I couldn't have been happier with that. And then they made a big upgrade, and now you have to sit there and click. And I know first world problems, but I love a self-refreshing screen. Well, that is the tech news today. Christina Warren, thank you so much for joining us as our guest co-anchor today.
Happy to be here.
We're going to have to find, next time we have you on, and I hope we have you on again soon, we're going to have to find something that you and I disagree on, because all this agreement is we can do better than that. We can argue.
We can totally argue.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
So where can people find your work, by the way?
All right, so you can find me on Mashable, where I'm a senior tech analyst, mashable.com/people/Christina, all my stories. And I'm on Twitter, I'm @film_girl, and I am sort of on Google+. I'm not that active, sorry, at + Christina Warren.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, well, you can subscribe to Tech News Today on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo, RSS, and other exciting places like that. And you can choose your favorite at twit.tv/TNT. Please follow us on Twitter. We're at film_girl. No, that's Christina Warren. We're at Tech News Today TV. Subscribe to our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com. And please send us your thoughts and opinions. Send email to tnt@twit.tv or leave voicemail at 260-TNT-SHOW. Don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name is Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.